in communication. The search we made for the valley of the body of Tompkins, that being the name of the lost man, I have some doleful memories. But first, before we left camp, the bosun gave us all very sound thought of the rum, and also a biscuit to piece. Thereafter, we hastened down, each man holding his weapon readily. Presently, when we come to the beach which ended the valley upon the seaward side, the bosun led us along the bottom of the hill, where the precipices came down into the softer stuff which covered the valley, and here we made a careful search. Perchance he had fallen over, and lay dead or wounded near to our hands. But it was not so. After that, we went to the mouth of the great pit, and have discovered the mud all about it to be covered with multitudes of tracks. In addition to these and slime, we found many traces of blood, but nowhere any sign of Tompkins. And so, having searched the valley, we came out upon the weed which strew the shore near to the great weed continent, but discovered nothing until we made up towards the foot of the hill, where it came down sheer into the sea. Here I climbed onto a ledge, and the same from which men had caught their fish, thinking of that, if Tompkinson had fallen from above, he might lie in the water at the foot of the cliff, which it was here, maybe some 10 to 20 feet deep. But for a little space, I saw nothing. Then suddenly, I discovered that there was something white down in the sea away to my left, and at that, I climbed further out along the ledge. In the wise, I perceived the thing which had attracted my notice was the dead body of one of the weed men. I could see, but dimly, catching odd glimpse of it as the surface of the water smoothed at whiles. It appeared to me to be lying curled up and somewhat on its right side, and in proof that it was dead, I saw a mighty wound that had come too near, shearing away the head. And so, after further glance, I came in and told what I had seen. That, being convinced by this time that Tompkins was indeed done to death, we ceased our search. But first, before we left the spot, The bosun climbed out to get a sight of the dead weedman, and after him the rest of the men, for they were greatly curious to see clearly what manner of creature it was that attacked us in the night. Presently, seeing so much of the brute as the water would allow, they came in again to the beach, and after returned to the opposite side of the land. And so, being there, we crossed over the boat. The sea weathered it hard, but found it to be untouched. Yet, that the creatures had been all about it, we could perceive by the marks of slime upon the sand, and also by the strange trail which they had left on the soft surface. Then one of the men called out that there had been something at Job's grave, which all remembered had been the sand some little distance from our first camp. At that, we all looked, all of us, and it was easy to see that it had been disturbed. And so we ran harshly, knowing not what to fear. Thus we found it to be empty, for the monster had digged down to the poor lad's body, and of it we could discover no sign. Upon this we came to a greater horror of the wee men than ever, for we knew them now to be foul ghouls who could not let even the dead body rest in a grave. Now after this, the bosun led us back to the top of the hill, and there he looked to our hurts, for one man had lost two fingers in the night's fray, and another had been bitten savagely in the left arm, whilst the third had all the skin of his face raised, whereas one of the brutes had fixed its tentacles, and of all these but scant attention, because of the stress of the fight. And after that, though the discovery that Tompkins was missing, however, the bosun set to upon them, washing and binding them up, and for dressings he made use of some of the oakum which we had with us, binding on strips torn from the roll of spare duck, which we had been in the locker of the boat. For my part, seizing this chance to make some examination of my wounded toe, which indeed was causing me to limp, I found I had endured less harm than seemed to me, for the bone of the toe was untouched, yet showing bare, yet when it was cleansed, I had not overmuch pain with it, though I could suffer to have the boot on, and so bound some canvas to my foot until such time as it should be healed. Presently, when our wounds were all attended to which had taken time, for there was none of us altogether untouched, the bosun bade the man whose fingers were damaged to lie down in the tent, and under the same order he also gave him that of the was bitten in the arm. Then the rest of us he directed to go down with him and carry up fuel, for that night has shown how our very lives depend on sufficiency of this. And so, all that That morning we brought fuel to the hilltop, both reeds and weed, resting not until midday, when he gave us further tot of rum, and after that set one of the men upon the dinner. Then he bade the man dress up and name who will propose to fly a kite over the vessel Norweed, to say whether he had any craft making in such a matter. At that, the fellow laughed and told the boatswain he would make a kite that would fly very steadily and strongly, this without the aid of a tail. And so the boatswain bade him to set without delay, for we should do well to deliver the people in the bulk afterwards, make all haste from the island, which was no better than nesting place of ghouls. Now, hearing the man say that the kite would fly without a tail, I was mightily curious to see what manner of thing he would make, for I have never seen the like, nor heard that it was possible. Yet he spoke of no more than he could accomplish, for he took two of the reeds and cut them in length about 6 feet, then bound them together in the middle so that they formed a St. Andrew's cross. And after he made 2 more such crosses, and when these completed he took 4 reeds, maybe a dozen feet long, and bade us to stand them upright in the shape of a square, so that they formed the 4 corners. And after that he took one of the crosses and laid it in the square so the 4 ends touched the 4 uprights, and in this position he lashed. Then he took the second cross and lashed it midway between the top and bottom of the uprights. After that he lashed the third at the top, so that all 3 of them acted as spreaders to keep the 4 longer reeds in place, as though they were for the uprights of a little square tower. Now, when he had gotten so far as that, the boatswain called out to make our uprights a little square, blah, 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 our dinners, and this we did, and afterwards a short time in which to smoke, and whilst we were thus at our ease, the sun came out, the which I had not done all day, and at that we felt vastly brighter, for the day had been very gloomy with clouds until that time, and with the loss of Tompkins, and our own fears and hurts, we have been exceedingly doleful. But now, as I have said, we become more cheerful and went very alertly to finishing of the kite. At this point, it came suddenly that to the boatswain that we had made no provision of a cord for the flying of the kite, and he called out to the man to know what strength the kite would require, at which Jessup answered, maybe 10 yards in it would do, and being so, the boatswain led 3 of us down to the wrecked mast upon the further beach. From this we stripped all that was left of the shrouds, and carried them hilltop, so presently having unlaid them, we set upon the sennit using 10 yards, but plating 2 as 1, which means we progressed with more speed if we have taken them singly. At this point, it came suddenly to the... Now we worked, glanced occasionally towards Jessup, and saw that he stitched a band of the light duck around each end of the framework, which he had made, and these bands I judged to be out 4 feet wide. In this wise, leaving an opening between the two so that now the thing looks somewhat like a punchy show that only the opening was in the wrong place, and there was too much of it. After that he bent on a bridle of the 2 uprights, making this a piece of good emperor we found in the tent, and then he called out to the boatswain that the kite was finished. At that, the boatswain went over to examine it, the which did all of us, for none of us had seen the like of such a thing, and if I misdoubt not, a few of us had much faith that it would fly, for it seemed too big and unwieldy. And now I think that Jessup gathered something of our thoughts, for calling one of us to hold the kite, lest it should blow away. He went into the tent and brought out the remainder of the hemp line, saying from which he cut the bridle. This he bent on it, and giving it to the other in our hands, bade us to go back with it till all the slack had been taken up. And meanwhile, steadying the kite, then we had gone back to the extent of the line, he shouted us to make a very particular hold on it, and then swooping the kite by the bottom and threw it into the air, whereupon, to our amazing, having swooped to one side, it steadily mounted upwards into the sky like a very bird. Now at this, as I may mention, we were astonished, for it appeared like a miracle to us to see such cumbrous a thing fly with so much grace and persistence. And further, we were mightily surprised at the manner in which it pulled upon the rope, tugging with such hardiness that we would have to loose it. Our first astonishment had not been for the warning on which Joseph called to us. And now, being well assured of the properness of the kite, the boatswain bade us to draw in, and we did with only the difficulty of the bigness and strength of the breeze. And when we had it back upon the hilltop, Jason moored it very securely to a giant piece of rock. And after that, having received our approbation, he turned to us upon making on the Senate. Presently, the evening drawing near, the boatswain set us to the building up fires about the hilltop. And after that, having waved our good nights to the people in the hulk, we made our suppers, and lay down to smoke, after which we turned again at our plating of the Senate, which we were in very great haste to have done, and so later, the dark having come down upon the island, the boatswain bade us to take burning weed from the Senate fire and light the heaps of weed that had been stacked around the edges of the hill for that purpose. And so, in a few minutes, the whole of the hilltop was very light and cheerful, and afterwards, having put 2 men to keep watch and attend the fires, he sent the rest of us back to our Senate making, keeping us at it until about 10 of the clock, after which he arranged that 2 men at a time should watch throughout the night. Then he bade us to turn in so soon as he had looked over our various hurts. Now, when it came to my watch, I discovered I had been chosen to accompany the big seaman, in which I was by no means displeased, for he was a most excellent fellow, and a very lusty man to have near, should anything come upon one unawares. Yet we were happy in that the night passed off without trouble of any sort, and thus came, and so at last came the morning. So soon as we made our breakfast, the boatswain took us all down to the carrying of fuel, for he saw very clearly upon a good supply of this depended our immunity from attack. And so far half the morning we worked together at gathering weeds and reeds for the fires, and then we obtained sufficiency for the coming night. He set us all to work again upon the Senate, and so until dinner, after which we turned once more upon our plating. Yet it was plain it would take several days to make sufficient line for the purpose. And because of this, the boatswain cast about his mind for which way he could quicken the production, as presently, as a result of some little thought, he brought out of the tent a long piece of hemp rope, which we moored the boat to the sea anchor, and proceeded to unlay it until he had all three strands separate, and then he bent the three together, and so had a very rough line of maybe some 180 fathoms in length. Yet, though so rough, he judged it strong enough, and thus we had much the less in it to make. Now, presently, we made our dinners, and after that, for the rest of the day, we kept very steadily to our lading, and so, with the previous day's work, we had nearly 200 fathoms completed by the time the boatswain called us to cease and come for supper. Thus, it will be seen, counting all, including the piece of line from which the Birtle had made, we may be said to at this time about 400 fathoms towards the length we needed for the purpose. This having been reckoned at 500 fathoms. After supper, having lit all the fires, we continued to work at the plating, and so until the boatswain set watches, after which we settled down for the night. First, however, letting the boatswain see to our hurts. Now, this night, like the previous, brought us no trouble, and when the day came, we had our first breakfast, and then set upon our collecting of the fuel, after which we had spent the rest of the day at the Senate, having manufactured a sufficiency by the evening, which the boatswain had celebrated by a very rousing tot of rum. Then, having made our supper, we lit the fires and had a very comfortable evening, after which he proceeded night, having the boatswain attend our wounds, and settled for the night. And on this occasion, the boatswain let a man who had lost his fingers and the one who had been bitten badly in the arm take the first turn at watching since the night of the attack. When the morning came, we were all very eager to come to flying the kite, for it seemed possible to us that we might effect the rescue of the people in the boat before the evening. And at the thought of this, we experienced a very pleasurable sense of excitement. Yet before the bosom of us touched the kite, he insisted that we should gather our usual supply and fuel, the which order, thought full of wisdom, irked us exceedingly, because of our eagerness to set about the rescue. But this was accomplished, and we were off to get the line ready, testing the knots. And seeing that it was all clear for running, yet before setting the kite off, the bosun took us down to the further beach to bring up the foot of the royal and gallant mast, which remained fast to the topmast. And when we had this upon the hilltop, he set ends upon 2 rocks, after which he piled a heap of great pieces around him, leaving the middle part clear. Round this he passed the kite line a couple or 3 times, then gave the end to Joseph to bend onto the bridle of his kite. And so he had all ready for paying out the wreck. And now, having nothing to do, we gathered round to watch immediately the bosun giving the signal. Joseph cast the kite into the air, and the wind catching it lifted it strongly and well, so that the bosun could scarce pay out fast enough. And now before the kite had been let go, Joseph had forward end of a great length of yarn spun so that those in the wreck could catch it as it trailed over them. And being eager to witness whether they would secure it without trouble, we all ran to the edge of the hill to watch. Thus, within 5 minutes of the time of the loosing of the kite, we saw people in the ship wave to us to cease veering, and immediately afterwards the kite came swiftly downwards, by which we knew they had the tripping line which were hauling upon it, and that we gave out a great cheer, and afterwards we sat about and smoked, waiting until they had read our instructions which we had written upon the covering of the kite. Presently, maybe half an hour afterwards, they signaled us to halt the line, which we proceeded to do without delay. And so, after a great space, we had hauled in all the rough line and came upon the end of theirs, which proved to be a fine piece of 3-inch hemp, new and very good. Yet we cannot conceive this would stand the stress necessary to lift such great length clear of the weed, as it would be needful, or ever could hope to bring the people of the ship over in safety. So we waited some little while, and presently they signaled again to us to haul, which we did, found that they had bent on a much greater rope to the right of the 3-inch hem, having merely intended for the latter for hauling the line, which to get the heavier rope across the weed to the island. Thus, after a weariful time of pulling, we got to the end of the bigger rope up to the hilltop and discovered it to be extraordinary sound ropes, some 4-inch diameter and smoothly laid of 5 yards round, and very true, well spun, and with this he had every reason to be satisfied. At the end of the big rope they had tied a letter in a bag of oilskin, and in it they had some very warm and grateful things to us. After which they set out a short code of signals to which would be able to understand one another on certain general manners. At the end, they asked if they could send any provisions ashore. As they explained, it would take a little while to get the rope set taut for that purpose, and the carrier fixed in on working order. Now, upon reading this letter, we called to the bosun and asked if she let us know to send some soft bread, in which he added thereto a request for lint and bandage and an ointment for our hurts. In this he bade me to write upon the great leaves from off the reeds, and at the end he told me to ask if they desired to send us them any fresh water. And all of this I wrote with a sharpened splinter of reed, cutting the words into the surface of the leaf. Then, when I made the end of the writing, I gave the leaf to the bosun and he closed it in the oilskin bag, after which he gave the signals with those in the hulk to haul on the smaller line, and this they did. Presently, they signed us to pull again, which we did, and they hauled the great length of the line. We came to the oilskin band, which we found lint and bandage and an ointment, and further letter which said they were baking bread and would send to us as soon as out of the oven. Now, in addition to the matters for healing our wounds, the letter, they included a bundle of paper and new sheets and some quills and inkhorn. At the end of the recital, they begged for earnestly to send them some news of the outer world, for they had been shut up in the strange continent of Weed for something of 7 years. They told us that there were 12 of them in the hulk, 3 of them being women, one who'd been captain's wife, but he had died soon after the vessel became entangled in the weed, and along with him more than half the ship's company had been attacked by giant devilfish as they were attempting to free the vessel from the weed. And afterwards, they who were left had built the supreme structure as protection against the devilfish, and the devil men, as they have termed them. Until it had been built, there had been no safety above the decks, neither day or night. To our questions if they were in need of water, the people in the ship replied they had sufficiency, and further, they were very well supplied with provisions, for the ship had sailed from London with general cargo, among which was a vast quantity of food in various shapes and forms. At this news we were greatly pleased, seeing that we have no more anxiety regarding the lack of victuals. And so in the letter which I went to the tent to write, I put down we were in great plenitude of provisions, at which hint I guess they would add somewhat to the bread when it should be ready. And after that I wrote down such chief events as my memory recalled occurred in the course of the past 7 years, and then a short account of our own adventures up to that time, telling them the attack we had suffered from the weed men, and asking such questions as my curiosity and wonder prompted. Now, whilst having been writing, sitting at the mouth of the tent, I observed from the time to time how the bosun was busied with the men and passing the end of the rope around the mighty boulder, which lay about 10 fathoms from the edge of the cliff which overlooked the hulk. This he did, parceling the rope where the rock was in any way sharp, so protected from being cut, which for the purpose he made some canvas, and by the time that I had let it completed, the rope was very secure to the great piece of rock, and further they put a large piece of chasing gear under the part of the rope where it took the edge of the cliff. Now having, as I said, completed the letter, I went out with it to the bosun, and before placing it in the oilskin bag, he bade me add a note to the bottom to say the big rope was all fast, and they could heave on it as soon as it pleased them. After that we dispatched a letter by means of the small line, the men in the hall calling it after them as soon as they perceived our signals. By this, it had come well on the latter part of the afternoon, and the bosun called to us to make some sort of meal, leaving one man to watch the hawk, perchance they should signal to us, for we missed our dinner and the excitement of the day's work, and were now come to feel the lack of it. Then in the midst of it, the man upon the lookout cried they were signaling us from the ship, and at that we all ran to see what they desired. And so, by the code we arranged between us, we found they waited for us to pawn the small line. This we did, and made out presently that we were hauling something across the weed of very fair bulk, to which we warmed to our work, guessing that it was the bread which they promised, and so it proved, done up with great neatness in a long roll of tarpaulin, which had been wrapped around both loaves, and the rope lashed very securely at the ends, thus producing a taper shape convenient for passing over the weed without catching. And now we came over this parcel and discovered my hint taken very sound effect, for in with the parcel, besides the loaves, a boiled ham, a Dutch cheese, 2 bottles of port well padded from breakage, and 4 pounds of tobacco and plugs. And at this coming of good things, we all stood upon the edge of the hill and waved our thanks to the ship. They waved back in all goodwill, and after we went back to our meal, which we sampled the new victuals with very lusty appetites. There was in the parcel one other matter, a letter, most neatly indited, as it been for the 4 epistles in a feminine handwriting, so they had guessed that one of the women to be the scribe. This epistle answer came one of my queries, and in particular, I remember informing me to the possible cause of the strange crying which preceded the attack by the weedmen, saying that each occasion when they in the ship have suffered their attacks, there always been this crying, being evidently summoning or call to the attack, though how given the writer had not discovered. For the weed devils, this being how they in the ship spoke always of them, made never a sound when attacking, not even when wounded to the death. Indeed, I may say here we never learnt the way with that loathsome sobbing was produced. Nor indeed did they, or we, discover more than the merest tithe of the mysteries which the great Ink&Abysss holds in its silence. Another matter to which I referred was the constant blowing of the wind from one quarter. In this direct it only happened for much as 6 months in the year, keeping a very steady strength. A further thing there which gave me much interest. It was the ship had not always been where we discovered her, for one day at a time had been so far within the weed that they could scarce discern the open sea upon the far horizon. But at times the weed opened up in great gulfs and went yawning through the continent for scores of miles. And in this way the shape and the coasts of the weeds were constantly being altered, these happenings being for the most part at the change of the wind. And much more there was that they told us then and afterwards, that they dried weed for the fuel, and how the range was fell with great heaviness at certain periods, supplied them with fresh water, though times running short, they had learned to distill sufficient for their needs until the next rains. Now, near to the end of the epistle, there came news of the Brer's presence actions, and thus we learned they and the ship were busy staying the stump of the mizzen mast, this being the one which the bows attached to the big rope, and though making great iron-bound snatch block, secured the head of the stump and down the mizzen capstan, by which and strong tackle will be able to heave the line so taut as needful. Now, having finished our meal, the boatswain took out the lint, bandages, and ointment, which they sent us from the hulk, and proceeded to dress our hurts, beginning with him who had lost 2 fingers, which happily were making a very healthy heel. And afterwards we all went to the edge of the cliff and sent back to the lookouts fill such crevice in his stomachs, yet remained empty. For we had passed him already some hunks of the bread and cheese to eat whilst he kept watch, and so he had suffered no great harm. It may have been near and after this that the boatswain pointed out to me that they and the ship commenced to heave upon the great rope, and so I perceived and stood watching it, for I knew that the boatswain had some anxiety whether that would take up sufficiency clear of the weed to allow the ship to be hauled along it, free from the molestation of the great devilfish. Presently, as evening began to draw on, the boatswain bade us to go and build our fires about the hilltop. This we did, after which we returned to learn how the rope was lifting, and how we perceived that it had come clear of the weed, we felt mightily rejoiced. It waved encouragement, the chance that any who watched us from the hulk. Yet, though the rope was up clear from the weed, the bite of it had to rise much greater height, or would it ever do for purpose for which we intended it. And already it suffered a vast change I discovered upon placing my hand upon it. For even to lift a slack of such great length line meant the stress of some tons. And later, I saw that the boatswain was growing anxious, for he went over the rock around which he would fast the rope, then examined the knots, In those places he had parceled it, and after he walked to the place where it went over the cliff, he had made further scrutiny, but came back presently, seeming not dissatisfied. Then, in a while, the darkness came down upon us, and we lighted our fires for the prepare for the night, having the watches arranged as